Hello and welcome to The Psychology of Us with Professor RJ Starr, where we explore the mind's influence on life, relationships, and society. RJ Starr is an existential psychologist, professor, and author dedicated to exploring the core challenges of human existence, how we find meaning, embrace responsibility, and navigate life's challenges. Known for a thought-provoking yet accessible approach, RJ inspires listeners to cultivate self-awareness, emotional intelligence, authenticity, and purpose. This podcast is designed for all psychology enthusiasts, practitioners, students, and anyone curious about why we think, feel, and behave the way we do. Each episode unpacks theories, explores complex questions, and offers insights that deepen understanding of the human experience. So settle in, stay curious, and discover the psychology of us.
Today, we're taking a closer look at something that's often misunderstood, but frequently mentioned: Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder, or OCD. Chances are you've heard someone say, "I'm so OCD," when talking about organizing their pantry or color-coding their wardrobe. Maybe you've even said it yourself. But here's the thing. True OCD is far more than a preference for tidiness or a love of order. Before we dive in, I want to stress that I'm an educator, a professor of psychology. I'm not a licensed therapist or clinician. My role is to educate, to help break down complex psychological concepts so we can all better understand ourselves and each other. This episode is not a substitute for professional medical or psychological advice, but it is a deep dive into the science, psychology, and lived experience of OCD. If you or someone you love is struggling, I encourage you to seek guidance from a licensed mental health professional. In this episode, we're going to unpack what OCD really is and what it isn't. We'll explore the science behind it, share stories that shed light on the lived experience, and most importantly, work toward a deeper understanding of how it impacts those who live with it. This conversation is close to my heart because I've seen firsthand the toll OCD can take on someone's life. It's not a punchline or a personality quirk. It's a complex and often misunderstood condition that deserves empathy, awareness, and action. So whether you're here because you're curious, because you love someone with OCD, or because you're living with it yourself, I hope this episode brings clarity, compassion, and maybe even a little hope. So let's get started, and let's start with the basics. What exactly is obsessive-compulsive disorder? It's a term we hear tossed around casually, but in reality, OCD is a serious mental health condition that goes far beyond the stereotypes. At its core, OCD is defined by two main components: obsessions and compulsions. Now, obsessions are intrusive, unwanted thoughts, images, or urges that cause significant anxiety or distress. These aren't the kinds of thoughts that you can simply brush off. They stick, looping the mind like a song you don't want stuck in your head. Only instead of a catchy tune, these thoughts are often disturbing or unsettling. Now, compulsions, on the other hand, are the behaviors or mental rituals a person uses to try to reduce the stress caused by those obsessions. These can range from washing hands repeatedly to counteract a fear of contamination, to silently repeating phrases or numbers to ward off a perceived danger. And here's where it gets tricky. The compulsions temporarily ease the anxiety, which reinforces the cycle. This feedback loop, obsession, distress, compulsion, relief, keeps OCD alive and well. Now, it's important to note that OCD isn't just about being overly clean or organized. I think of a student I worked with. Let's call her Emma. Emma struggled with obsessive fears of harming others, even though she would never intentionally hurt a fly. She'd spend hours retracing her steps, convinced she might have actually bumped someone with her car without realizing it. It was exhausting for her, not just the rituals, but the guilt and shame she felt over even having these intrusive thoughts. And this is where we need to break down one of the biggest misconceptions about OCD. It's not about personality quirks or perfectionism. It's about managing overwhelming anxiety. Emma wasn't obsessing because she wanted to, but because her mind felt trapped in a cycle of fear and doubt. To ground this discussion in science, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM-5, provides specific criteria for diagnosing OCD. These criteria include the presence of obsessions and compulsions that are time-consuming, think more than an hour a day, or cause significant distress or impairment in daily life. And it's important to point out that OCD isn't the same as Obsessive-Compulsive Personality Disorder, or OCPD, which is a whole other topic. The casual misuse of the term OCD often minimizes the realities of those living with it. You might hear someone say, "I'm so OCD about my desk." But for someone with true OCD, that desk could be a source of anxiety, not satisfaction. The compulsion to arrange it just right isn't about neatness. It's about silencing the intrusive thoughts that something terrible might happen if it's not perfect. So why does this matter? Misunderstanding OCD makes it harder for people to seek help. If we think of OCD as a quirky personality trait, we risk overlooking the serious impact it has on mental health and daily functioning. That's why we're starting here, with clarity, because when we understand what OCD really is, we're one step closer to breaking the stigma and fostering compassion. Now that we've laid the foundation, let's take a deeper dive into the science behind OCD. What's happening in the brain, and why does this condition develop? We'll explore that next. To truly understand OCD, we need to dive into the science, the fascinating interplay between the brain, behavior, and biology. At its core, OCD is a disorder rooted in the brain. Research shows that certain areas of the brain are hyperactive in individuals with OCD, particularly the orbitofrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate cortex, and the basal ganglia. These regions of the brain are involved in decision-making, error detection, and habit formation, functions that become overactive and misaligned in those with OCD. It's as if the brain's internal alarm system is stuck in the on position, creating a constant sense of threat. Imagine this. You're leaving the house and you can't remember if you locked the door. For most people, a quick check is enough to reassure them. But for someone with OCD, that reassurance doesn't stick. The brain keeps sending the signal. What if you didn't lock it? So they check again and again. The brain's inability to shut off the alarm creates the cycle of obsession and compulsion. At the chemical level, serotonin, a neurotransmitter involved in mood regulation and thought processing, plays a key role. Studies suggest that imbalances in serotonin pathways contribute to the repetitive thoughts and behaviors seen in OCD. This is why medications like selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs, are often effective in reducing symptoms. They help to restore the balance in these neural circuits. But what causes these imbalances in the first place? The exact answer is still elusive, but we do know that OCD has a strong genetic component. If you have a close relative with OCD, your chances of developing it are higher, although genetics alone don't tell the whole story. Environmental factors such as trauma, illness, or significant stress can also play a role in triggering symptoms in those who are predisposed. Let me share an example that illustrates this complex interplay. Years ago, I worked with a young man, let's call him James, who developed severe OCD symptoms after a bout of strep throat. His symptoms seemed to come out of nowhere. Sudden, overwhelming obsessions about germs and compulsions to wash his hands dozens of times a day. This phenomenon is known as PANDAS, P-A-N-D-A-S, or Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorders Associated with Streptococcal Infections. It's a big one, right? Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorders Associated with Streptococcal Infections. In cases like James, the body's immune response to infection seems to mistakenly attack brain cells, leading to OCD-like symptoms. This link between biology and behavior shows us just how intricate and interconnected the human mind and body are. But it's not just about the brain. It's also about how we think. Cognitive behavioral patterns play a huge role in maintaining OCD. Remember Emma from earlier? Emma's obsessive fears about harming others weren't based on reality, but her mind treated them as real. And her compulsions, repeatedly checking her car, for instance, only reinforced the cycle. This is where the cognitive behavioral model of OCD provides valuable insight. It tells us that obsessions are driven by catastrophic misinterpretations of normal thoughts. For example, most of us have fleeting random thoughts like, what if I just swerved my car off the road? We dismiss them because we know they're meaningless. But someone with OCD might fixate on that thought, interpreting it as a real danger or a reflection of their character. Over time, the compulsions designed to neutralize these thoughts, whether it's counting, washing, or checking, become automatic responses. And while they might provide temporary relief, they ultimately strengthen the obsessive cycle. Interestingly, this cycle has been documented in historical figures as well. Howard Hughes, the famous aviator and filmmaker, is often cited as a classic case of untreated OCD. His intense fear of germs and relentless need for control consumed his life in his later years. Stories about Hughes meticulously sealing doors with duct tape or burning his clothes after someone sneezed nearby illustrate how severe OCD can become without intervention. Understanding the science of OCD helps us see it for what it is, a neurological and psychological condition, not a choice, not a character flaw. It's the brain doing its job, protecting us from harm, but doing it too well and in the wrong way. So now that we've explored the science behind OCD, let's turn our attention to what it's like to live with this condition. How does it shape a person's daily life, relationships, sense of self? That's where we're headed next. Because understanding the day-to-day experience of OCD isn't just about facts, it's about empathy. For someone living with OCD, the world can feel like a battlefield of intrusive thoughts and exhausting rituals. Imagine waking up in the morning and feeling compelled to follow a strict routine just to ease your anxiety. You might have to flip a light switch exactly 10 times before you can leave a room. If you don't, the thought that something terrible will happen nags at you until it's unbearable. This cycle of obsessions and compulsions isn't just time-consuming, it's emotionally draining. OCD doesn't give you a day off. It's always there, lurking in the background, ready to hijack your focus or derail your plans. Take Sarah, for example, a woman who struggled with contamination fears. For her, the simple act of grocery shopping was overwhelming. Every time she picked up a product, she felt an intense need to sanitize her hands. By the end of her trip, her skin was raw and bleeding, and she was emotionally depleted. She wasn't doing this because she wanted to. It was because she felt she had to. Her compulsions weren't about cleanliness. They were about quieting the relentless voice of her obsessions. And it's not just the physical toll. OCD affects relationships too. Friends and family often don't understand what's happening, which can lead to frustration on both sides. They might say, just stop, not realizing how impossible that feels for someone with OCD. This lack of understanding can make the person with OCD feel isolated or even ashamed. But the shame doesn't only come from others. It also and often comes from within. Many people with OCD are fully aware that their fears and behaviors don't make logical sense, but that awareness doesn't make it any easier to stop. In fact, it can make things worse, fueling a cycle of self-criticism and guilt. This inner turmoil can make someone feel as if they're at war with their own mind. It's why OCD is often described as the doubting disease. Every decision, every action, every thought becomes a source of doubt. Did I lock the door? What if I didn't? Am I a bad person for having that thought? Did I lock the door? On and on. Even daily tasks can feel monumental. Think about something as simple as writing an email. For someone with OCD, this could spiral into hours of rereading and rewriting to make sure there's no mistake, no possibility of offending someone, no reason to feel guilt later. And let's not forget the financial cost. OCD can interfere with someone's ability to work or to hold a steady job, especially when rituals and intrusive thoughts consume so much time and energy. In severe cases, people may feel forced to avoid situations altogether, leading to social withdrawal and missed opportunities. This is why empathy is so critical. When you understand the toll OCD takes, it becomes easier to see why phrases like, "I'm so OCD," can feel dismissive and hurtful. It's not about having a tidy desk or liking your books alphabetized. It's about living with a condition that can feel all-encompassing. I remember a young man, let's call him Alex, who struggled with religious obsessions, also known as scrupulosity. He would pray for hours each day, not out of devotion, but out of fear. Fear that if he didn't, he would somehow offend God or bring harm to his loved ones. His rituals left him exhausted, but stopping them filled him with unbearable anxiety. Alex's story highlights something important. OCD doesn't discriminate. It can latch on to anything: a fear of germs, a need for symmetry, or even deeply personal beliefs. And while the content of the obsessions may vary, the emotional experience is often the same: fear, shame, and the desperate need for relief. Living with OCD means navigating a world that doesn't often understand the condition. But here's the good news. It's also a world where help is available. Treatments like therapy and medication can make a profound difference, giving people the tools they need to reclaim their lives. In this next section, we'll explore what that help looks like. How can someone break free from the cycle of obsessions and compulsions? And what role do we, as a society, play in supporting them? Because while OCD can be overwhelming, it's also treatable. And with the right support, many people can find relief and reclaim their lives. So let's talk about hope. The cornerstone of OCD treatment is a form of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, known as exposure and response prevention, or ERP. ERP is considered the gold standard for treating OCD because it directly addresses the cycle of obsessions and compulsions. In a nutshell, here's how it works. In a safe and controlled setting, a therapist helps the individual confront their obsessions without engaging in the usual compulsions. For example, if someone is afraid of contamination and compulsively washes their hands, the therapist might encourage them to touch a doorknob and then sit with the anxiety that follows without washing. The goal isn't to eliminate the anxiety right away. It's to show the brain that the feared outcome doesn't happen. Over time, this process can retrain the brain, weakening the connection between the obsession and the compulsion. It's not easy, it's time-consuming, but it's transformative. I remember a student I'll call Rebecca. She had an intense fear of harming others, which led to hours of checking and rechecking her surroundings. During ERP, she learned to sit with the discomfort of not checking, something she never thought she could do. Little by little, Becca started to reclaim her time, her energy, and her confidence. She wasn't cured. OCD is a chronic condition, but she gained the tools to manage it. In addition to therapy, medications like selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, can be effective, particularly for more severe cases. SSRIs help by increasing serotonin levels in the brain, which can reduce the intensity of obsessions and compulsions. For many, the combination of medication and therapy provides the best results. But let's not overlook the importance of community and understanding. Stigma around mental health can make it difficult for people to seek help. Imagine knowing you need support, but being too afraid of judgment to reach out. This is why we must create a culture of empathy, one where people feel safe to share their struggles and seek help without fear. For families and friends of someone with OCD, education is key. The more you understand the condition, the better equipped you'll be to offer meaningful support. It's not about pushing someone to just stop their compulsions. It's about being patient, listening without judgment, and encouraging professional help. Let me share a personal reflection. Early in my career, I worked with a family who didn't understand their teenage son's OCD. They saw his rituals as attention-seeking behavior and thought discipline was the answer. But once they learned about the nature of OCD, their perspective shifted. They became his greatest advocates, supporting him through therapy and celebrating his progress. Watching that transformation was a powerful reminder of the impact education and compassion can have. There's also a larger societal role to consider. Media and pop culture often portray OCD inaccurately, reducing it to quirks or humor. This not only trivializes the condition, but also perpetuates misconceptions. As people, we can challenge these narratives by speaking up when we see them and by sharing accurate information. For anyone listening who might be living with OCD, let me say this: you are not alone. Help is available and recovery is possible. It might not feel that way when you're stuck in the thick of it, but countless people have walked this path and come out stronger on the other side. And if you love someone with OCD, your understanding and support can make all the difference. You don't need to have all the answers. You just need to show up with kindness and with an open heart. OCD doesn't have to define a person's life. With treatment, patience, and community, there's a way forward. So as we wrap up today's episode, I want to thank you for taking the time to explore this important topic with me. Obsessive-Compulsive Disorder is so much more than the stereotypes we often hear. It's a deeply challenging condition that impacts every facet of a person's life. But as we've discovered, there's also hope. Understanding OCD begins with recognizing that it's not a personality trait or a quirk. It's a real mental health condition rooted in the brain. We've talked about the science, the experience of living with OCD, and the treatments that can help people reclaim their lives. And most importantly, we've explored the role of empathy, both for those living with OCD and for those supporting them. So what can you do with this knowledge? Maybe it's rethinking how you use the term OCD in your daily conversations. Maybe it's taking a moment to educate yourself further or to reach out to someone who might need help. If you or someone you know is struggling, I encourage you to seek help. Organizations like the International OCD Foundation and NAMI, N-A-M-I, offer resources that can make a world of difference. And remember, if you're living with OCD, your condition doesn't define you. The fact that you've made it this far shows your resilience, even when it might not feel that way. Help is available and healing is possible. Thank you for spending time with me today. It's always an honor to share these conversations with you, and I hope today's episode has brought clarity, compassion, and maybe even a little inspiration.
That wraps up this episode of The Psychology of Us with Professor RJ Starr. Each conversation is a step toward greater understanding of ourselves, each other, and the forces that shape human behavior. Listeners are invited to continue the conversation by sharing their thoughts, questions, and topic suggestions at profrjstarr@outlook.com. Every message helps shape future episodes, ensuring the discussions remain relevant, thought-provoking, and meaningful. For those who find value in these explorations, subscribing and leaving a review is a great way to support the podcast and bring these insights to a wider audience. Until next time, stay curious, stay thoughtful, and keep exploring the psychology of us.